It's a Big 12 showdown. What are the keys to victory for the UCF Knights versus the BYU Cougars? It's homecoming. Let's talk about their keys to victory.
You are Locked On UCF, your daily podcast on the UCF Knights, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome on into Locked On UCF, your daily UCF podcast. I'm your host, Mike G, and thank you so much for making Locked On UCF your first listen of every day. Joining me, as he always does, is the man, the myth, the legend, Andrew Glucko from The Last Word on Sports. We're talking UCF. We're talking BYU Cougars. And you know what, Andrew? BYU fans are talking BYU Cougars in our mentions here this week. So it's been interesting seeing the response from BYU. They feel disrespected by the spread. UCF is favored now by -2. We talked about this earlier in the week, but before we get into the three keys to the game, what do you think about this spread moving here, man?
Well, I'm shocked. Basically, they're saying this is a pick even game, and you know it must be about the matchups. And we talked about this before. UCF's run game versus BYU's run defense. It's not a good matchup for BYU. As a result, UCF can put points on the board if their run blocking can do their job, which is, yeah, seriously, you don't know what you're getting out of this offensive line. But if they can do the job, the running backs are hardcore. You know, RJ Harvey, Jacurri Brown has been named the full-time starter. He's got some wheels. We saw it last week against Iowa State. So this is a team that can do a lot of damage on the ground if the blocking works out. That works in UCF's favor. But on the flip side, the Cougars know how to score, and they're going to score quite a bit. I mean, that's just how they roll. So it's really a question of can they keep up? But I'm a little surprised that Vegas took an early BYU favor spread and flipped it. I'm a little surprised.
Well, let's jump into our keys to the game. You kind of hit on it there. That's where I was going to start. I think for for UCF, it's the run game. It is piling up the yards on the ground like they did Iowa versus Iowa State. Can they make a repeat performance? 354 yards is what they put up last week. I think they're going to need something closer to that, if not more, to play ball control and keep the ball away from Jake Retzlaff.
And goes with the same thing, keeping the ball out of Retzlaff's hands. Third down defense. This has been an Achilles heel for UCF. Yet they had a bend and not break mentality with Cincinnati, with Iowa State. But part of the problem is they couldn't get them. You know, they stayed on the field too long. And this was dogging them against Colorado and Florida. Is the third down conversions that they give up. Sure, they may tighten up in the red zone and keep touchdowns off the board, but you got to end these possessions quick, get your defense a chance to rest, and allow the offense to get to work. So third down defense is one of my keys, kind of to counteract your running game one.
Sticking here with third down defense, I think you made a good point. Versus Iowa State, when you can't get off the field on third down, to me, that's what shows up at ends of games. You can't get off the field on third down. That team's driving. You're in a tight one. Vegas said this is a 2-point spread here. That means it may be last team with the ball wins. So if Vegas is right and you can't get off the field on third down, but you're not the last one with the ball, you lose, Andrew.
That's what happened last week. Yeah, you see, Iowa State was the last one with the ball. Essentially, they scored with under a minute to go. UCF had nothing left to work with, and just panic mode, couldn't convert. Eventually there was a turnover to end the game. But again, if you're looking at if they're as you said, if they're correct that this spread is going to be the way it plays out, you're right. Last possession wins. And that goes to my second point, getting out in front. This was something that Gus Malzahn has said over and over again. UCF couldn't do it against Colorado. They couldn't do it with TCU. They couldn't do it with Florida. They did it with Iowa State. They got out in front early. They hit hard, and they started to establish the tempo of the offense. If they can do that and establish the tempo of the game, that really plays into the Knights' hand. If they once again build themselves a deficit, this is not a team built to come back. You're a running team. You get out in front and then you grind. You wear them down. You can't fall back a lot, have to go to the pass and hope for the best. We saw what happened outside of the TCU game where it was just they're rolling, in a D&D world, they're rolling 20s, creating these miracle moments to come back from a game they should have, lost. You can't expect that to happen again. So you have to set the tempo early, get out in front.
Well, I agree 100% on this one. If Jacurri Brown does not improve with his arm in this game over last week's performance, 62 yards through the air, you cannot play from behind because you got to throw the ball most of the time to catch up, Andrew. And if they can't throw the ball, then they're not playing for the front and they don't start fast, I fear that this spread may not be accurate in a lot of ways. So if UCF doesn't get out in front, BYU could win big here in the bounce house.
And that comes to my third point, red zone opportunities. UCF's red zone conversions for touchdowns is absolutely atrocious. They need, when their offense works great up until the 20-yard line, and then it sputters. They had success last week, and that's why this game was close. They need to be able to, when they get in the red zone, not just put a field goal up there. They need touchdowns, and that comes back to your run blocking game because you're in a short field. You're going to be, running the ball a lot more. You need that explosiveness because you don't have as much room in the second level of the defense to really maneuver. So you got to have the explosion at the point of contact at the line, and that's one area that UCF just greatly struggles at. I mean, you look at their Pro Football Focus numbers in run blocks. I mean, their best game was Sam Houston, but I mean, it's Sam Houston. You go beyond that. The next, their best game since conference play if you take out New Hampshire and Sam Houston, was last week, against Iowa State. And we saw what they did in the first half. They went off. Well, the run blocking was working. Eventually it sputtered in the second half, but we can see what happens when the run blocking works in the open field and in the red zone, because they were converting red zone opportunities into touchdowns. They have to do that along with getting out in front early. They kind of work together.
The ever important red zone offense, taking advantage of opportunities in the red zone. My last two here, turnover margin. You can't lose the turnover battle and beat this team. So last week versus Iowa State, we saw them have 1.5 pick sixes. But I think that's going to be important. Now, I'm not saying the defense has to score, but can this defense turn BYU over and create some short fields for an offense that's struggling to move the ball through the air with this quarterback? I think that's going to be super important for UCF in this one.
Yeah, and the thing is, not only do they have to create turnovers, but they have to create points off it, and that's what they did last week. Yeah. Even though that second one wasn't a pick six, the ball ended up on the 1 yard line. They got 2 touchdowns out of those 2 turnovers. That's what you have to do. So when you think about it, the offense put up 3 touchdowns. They put up 21 points. The defense still gave up 38. So, I mean, it was a good equalizer, but let's be real. The game really wasn't as close as the score actually dictated. There was a couple of just key mistakes that happened, and UCF took advantage of it. But if they're going to keep up with this offense, and this is a really good BYU offense, they have to create mistakes. But I think and you've said this on multiple shows, and I think you're absolutely right. This is a team that can be turned over. Retzlaff is a quarterback that can throw interceptions. He's got 7 on the year, I think. 5 or 7. He's thrown the ball to the wrong team multiple times, as opposed to Rocco Becht, who I think had 3 coming into the game last week, and then UCF picked him off twice. They did the same thing to Brendan Sorsby in Cincinnati, who I think had 1 coming into the game, and he picked them off. So UCF can do this. They did it to Shedeur Sanders as well. They can create those opportunities on the defensive side. It's a good defensive backfield. Yeah, I don't think they get enough credit because they've given up some big plays, but that's because the pass rush has been so bad that they're left on islands and things happen. But they're pretty good at also making interceptions, and they've done it, and I think they can do it, but they have to convert.
Agreed. My last key to the game is big plays on offense, particularly through the air. Will Ferrell wants more cowbell. I want more Kobe Hudson. No Kobe Hudson in the last game. Obviously, Jacurri Brown had 62 yards. He's got to be able to hit the big play downfield to keep this BYU defense honest. If you cannot hit the big play, I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying it gets harder. Kobe Hudson is way too talented to not be a part of this game plan simply because you decided to go with another quarterback.
Yeah, and I think that'll improve this week. Part of it is the building of timing and chemistry. Let's we got to remember last week, Iowa State's pass defense was just absolutely phenomenal. They're one of the best in the country, and that's a tough task. First start of the season, you haven't had much chance to work with the ones, and you're being thrown to the wolves on this one because they're just that good. They were 5th in the country in yards per game coming into it. They're now up to 3rd in the country in yards per game allowed. That's a good Iowa State pass defense. And Jacurri Brown is not the only quarterback they've humiliated.
Yeah.
They've humiliated other guys out there, throughout the year. So I think this will be a much better opportunity. You're playing at home. The environment's different. The real question is, has the fan base been turned off by what's happened in the first 7 games? Is that going to impact the turnout and energy at this game? The message boards, Twitter, all that, Facebook, there's a lot of angry fans out there. And I've seen a lot saying, I'm not coming back. The question is that the majority or is that just a vocal minority?
Yeah. Yeah. Look, these days when the kids think that they're the man, they say, I'm him. That's what they say. They say, I'm him, which takes us to our break. So before we get into the next topic, a quick word from our sponsors. Andrew, this segment is brought to you by our friends at Hims.
Wait a second. I've heard this question before.
Look, sometimes intimate moments happen spontaneously, and when it does, you want to be him. That's where our friend at Hims come in. And we always want to be ready so we can perform in the bedroom. Hims provides access to treatments that can help you stay hard and last hard, giving you that boost of confidence so you can be ready when the mood strikes. Your sex life is important. But your schedule is busy. You don't have the time to go to the doctor's office and get treated for ED and all that foolishness. Through Hims, you can get a personalized ED treatment without stepping outside of your door. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That's hims.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment. That's hims/lockedon. Andrew, getting into our second segment here, I want to have a different kind of conversation today on the eve of the game. Who needs this more? 3 and 4 nights or the undefeated BYU Cougars?
Oh, this one's so easy. It's UCF needs this more.
Okay.
This is a season spiraling out of control, even though the game was a very close one last week. Felt like a year. It's still a loss. And you're losing the fan base. After a bunch of players enter the portal, it feels like you may be losing the team. Things are just spiraling. And BYU, they've got a resume enough to where if they got a loss, they could still be, one loss the whole year.
I agree.
They're still in the hunt, 1, for a Big 12 title, and 2, they're still in the hunt for an at-large in the CFP. I don't think their season's over with a loss in this case, unless it's a blowout loss, in which then I think the at-large is off the table, but the conference certainly is still on. Because you have a handful of teams, Kansas State, Iowa State, BYU, that are front runners to make it to that conference championship. I've got penciled in. It's BYU, Iowa State, and imagine if both run as close to as running their respective tables as they can. What a showdown that would be. And if you're a fan of the Big 12, take your team fandom out of this. If you're a fan of the Big 12, you actually want this to happen because the conference, after losing Texas and Oklahoma, need a heavyweight in this postseason. There's something magical going on in Ames where they're trekking towards their first 10-win season ever, their first conference championship since before World War I.
Andrew, it sounds like you're making a case for why BYU needs it more.
No, but they can absorb the loss and it still be very valuable. But let me be very clear. As cool as it would be for both of the, Iowa State and BYU to run the table, BYU doesn't have to run the table if they only have one loss.
That's
UCF
true.
Needs this. They're on the verge. Look, they still have to play, Arizona, Arizona State, West Virginia, and Utah. They need to. They lose this game, they almost essentially have to run the tables to get to a bowl game. So, their backs are getting against the wall. There's not much margin of error. They need a win.
I'm going to argue the other side here. I'm going to say BYU needs this one more. To some extent, UCF fans have they fired up the Gus bus train, whatever you want to call it, right? And they haven't completely checked out, but you're not playing for a Big 12 championship really at this point. If you're the Knights, you're not playing for a playoff berth seriously at 3-4. But for BYU, to your point about the Big 12 championship game and absorbing, I think they can absorb one loss. I'm not sure they can absorb two. I'm not sure they could absorb two. And if you get to that Big 12 title game with one loss and you lose a second one, it could hurt their chances. Now, on the crossover episode that we did earlier this week, we talked about, could the Big 12 get 3 teams in? Well, absolutely. I think that scenario involves an undefeated BYU versus an undefeated Iowa State in the Big 12 title game, and the loser still makes it. However, you've got Kansas State and you've got Colorado, who, by the way, down the stretch doesn't play Iowa State or BYU. That could sit, if they win out, they're sitting there with 2 losses. And make no mistake, this committee will put Deion Sanders' team in that playoff. That's how the Big 12 gets 3 teams in. But I think that BYU and Iowa State have to get to that Big 12 title game undefeated. And if either one slip before then so much is going to be on the line in that Big 12 title game. I'm not sure that the runner-up makes it. It's going to be interesting to see how the committee treats it. Do they jump another 2-loss Big 12 team over the runner-up in the Big 12 title game? They've done some crazy things. Look what happened in the SEC last year with Texas and Oklahoma, and Georgia was the SEC runner-up, man. They lost. Their only loss was in the SEC championship game, Andrew, and they got left out of the playoff, and they were probably the best team in the country. So there's precedent for the conference runner-up, no matter how good, being left out. I think it's your chances are better in a 12-team playoff with 1 loss. With 2 losses, you could be looking at a Georgia-type situation last year where you're a really good team that does not make this playoff.
Well, in fairness, obviously Georgia being left out of a 4-team playoff is a little bit different than being left out of a 12-team.
Sure.
Obviously, the margin of error is wider, but part of what
is it though for that at large? Is it though for the at large?
It is, but it depends on what the other conferences are doing. The SEC is starting to cannibalize itself a little bit. It actually plays towards the Big 12. The fact that, other than Clemson, you don't really have a whole lot of standout in the ACC. That helps the Big 12. You've obviously North Carolina has tanked. Florida State has tanked. North Carolina State has tanked. Outside of Clemson, who's your best team? Pitt. That plays towards the Big 12, which is a little more top heavy. Yeah, you mentioned Colorado. Colorado's is the 4th team looking in at this point, and they would probably be favored against 80-90% of the ACC. So that competition matters. The SEC has struggled a little bit. Ole Miss has already dropped a couple of games. Georgia, you don't know what you're getting out of them. Like they looked great against Texas, but they also have looked flat at times. So it's like you don't know what you're getting out of them. Alabama, enough said, with what happened with them and Tennessee. Tennessee's having a great run, but I'm waiting for the annual collapse at some point because it seems to always happen.
It's going to happen.
I'm waiting for it. So that actually all helps the Big 12. They just have to focus on them. But in the case of Georgia, a lot of that was just the environment around them with what was going on in the Pac-12 and the Big 10 really, pushed Georgia out. In a normal season, I don't think they would have been left out, but because of Alabama and what was going on there and the epic cratering that was Florida State's losing Jordan Travis. So I think a lot of it is outside of the Big 12's control. It's really more the dynamics of these other power conferences, particularly the ACC and the SEC. The Big Ten is going to do what they're going to do. It's Ohio State in a bag of potato chips. Maybe throw in Penn State for just to make people happy. But it's really, again, it all comes down to the SEC and how they kind of solidify on the top end of the conference. They're starting to eat each other up a little bit, and that again plays in the favor of the Big 12 with their conference scheduling.
On my day job, I talked to Heather Dinich over at ESPN. We did a wonderful interview. She said that it's possible that the SEC gets 5 teams in. I think that affects the math for the Big 12, certainly. But I don't see 5 teams getting in as it is right now. So big opportunity for the Big 12 here. Look, we're going to make our predictions as we do every Friday about this. So we're going to pick a winner, and we're going to pick the spread, but after a word from our sponsors. Today's show is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Andrew, no matter what you believe in life, no matter what doctrine you follow, whatever mantra you apply every day, I think we can both agree that the ACC is the worst P4 conference. Are they not?
Oh, that goes without saying.
They're terrible. That has nothing to do with the ad read. I just want to throw a stray at the ACC. But look, the Big 12 is surging. And there's a big game this weekend down in Orlando, BYU versus the UCF Knights. The spread we mentioned has flipped on its head. It is -2 UCF. BYU fans feel disrespected by that. I think they should, honestly. I think they should feel disrespected by that. And that's no shot at UCF, obviously, because I'm about to pick UCF to win this game. But I think it's going to be a great game. And no matter what side of it you're on, guys, or whatever you decide to bet it at FanDuel. Go check out our friends at FanDuel. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets, guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. -2, Andrew. I went back and forth with this one. I don't know how I pick either team to cover here. At -2, you just got to pick a winner or a loser, don't you?
I mean, it's essentially a pick because you normally give 3 points to the home team, so you've got 1 point. In a neutral situation, it's 1 point to BYU. So basically, it's a pick game, which it's weird. BYU, like Vegas, doesn't like BYU or something because they seem to have some weird spreads. And for an undefeated team, this just seems weird. They're playing against a 3-4 team that just can't get their poop together. Yeah, and they're an underdog. I mean, I just think it's kind of weird. So I know you got your prediction. I'm going to throw mine out there and beat you to the punch. I've got BYU covering this one. I think at the end of the day, it's still going to be a close game, like maybe a touchdown or so, but at a 2-point UCF, favored, spread, I take the underdog in this one. You've got a little bit of room to play with, but I think BYU is going to put points on the board. And I don't think UCF is going to create enough mistakes like they did against Iowa State to be able to make up for that because the offense is only going to be able to do so much.
So you're taking BYU +2.
BYU +2.
Okay, but outright though, does UCF
BYU? Oh, I've got BYU outright. I've got BYU outright. I've got BYU by a touchdown.
I had UCF last week, and look, I thought a lot about this one, and sometimes Andrew, you just have a change of heart over what you decided previously. Today's not that day, though. I'm going with UCF. I think UCF wins this one. Some things you just can't explain. And last week, they were so close to pulling this off. I think it continues this week. I'm looking for that run game to continue to improve. As far as the spread is concerned, I'm with you. I would take BYU in the points. I see something crazy happening here. I talked about what's happening down in Orlando right now. I spoke with offensive analyst down there, Jarris McIntyre, today about what's going on with the program. Look, right now, the hope is alive in that program. They believe that there's something left to play for this season. Jarris is going to join us, Andrew, this offseason to talk about that program. And we got some more surprises for our Locked On UCF family here. But they do have something to play for. And this is every coach's challenge at the end of the season. Here you are, you're 3-4, 7 games in, and you've got to find a rallying cry that works for your team, that they can buy into and that they believe in and finish strong, because it's going to matter in recruiting. It's going to matter, in terms of, momentum for your program. And if you're Gus Malzahn, it's going to matter for your job. I'll take you back to another time in Gus Malzahn's career, Andrew, where he was going to be gone from Auburn in 2017. They thought that was the end. It was the end of his contract. Auburn was set to move on from Gus. And then he beat number 1 Georgia. And then 2 weeks later, he beat number 1 Alabama. And it was absolutely untenable to fire a coach that beat Kirby Smart and Nick Saban in the same season in a 2-week span. So I just couldn't do it. And he got a $49 million extension, and then they fired him 3 years later. So he was a rich guy. But look, Gus is good for these. He's good for these, and you can say what you want about him. But it didn't go as planned. I think that the decision to bring KJ Jefferson into this program is one that will be scrutinized to high hell until they start winning games. And he's got to find a direction after this. We talked about this earlier. It sounds like KJ's done here. He's not even in the plan for anything at this point. So they're going to try to find their way right now the rest of the season with Jacurri Brown and EJ Colson. Colson, if need be, but Jacurri is the guy. And you've got to establish him and find something with him, which is kind of been an Achilles heel of Gus. Is once his first option at quarterback doesn't work, it has not worked out very well for him. History has taught us. Before we get out of here, Andrew, I'm going to give you the last word because you're the last word on sports. Tell people where they can find your work.
And I'm never short in an opinion.
That's why we have you.
You can catch me on Twitter /X at StatBoyDrew, as well as the Last Word on College Football, which is part of the Last Word on Sports family.
Guys, thanks for making Locked On UCF your first listen today. For your second listen, go check out Locked On Big 12 podcast. Drake Toll leads the conversation in conference realignment news and holds no punches when it comes to covering every team in the Big 12. Find Locked On Big 12 on YouTube wherever you listen to podcasts. That includes Apple, iTunes, and Spotify. You can find Drake there too. We're going to get out of here, but we'll be back at you guys after the game. If they win, we might be back at you guys Sunday to talk about this. But come back and check us out. This has been your episode of Locked On UCF.